right, here we are and On the Fringe, and this is week two. This is episode 2, 3 of our Abyssinian deep dive. And Dave, can you just remind me where we left off last episode?
So we've been talking about Nigeria. Excuse me, not Nigeria. We've been talking about Ethiopia. We
Oh,
just filmed our
Dave,
short. We just filmed our
Dave,
short on
oh,
Nigeria. I know
Dave.
that's
I
gonna
I
be
gotta find a clip
recorded.
to throw myself off of. Jeez Louise, I got
Dave's
sixth
fired.
graders who wouldn't
We
make
got a
that.
job opening on the Fringe. If anybody wants to live life on the Fringe, well, there's a place for you right now next to Gavin. Um,
Are you threatening people, Dave? Um,
Possibly. I don't want to get charged with anything, so we'll just drop it there.
anyways, we're
Been
back.
talking about
We're
Ethiopia
talking about
for the
Ethiopia.
last two episodes, stitched them together, and basically why Ethiopia is in growing importance in international affairs, and basically why the Ethiopians want to have a port on the Red Sea, and kind of what's going on in that neighborhood between Ethiopia. You've got Somalia, you've got Egypt. All three countries are kind of, I guess, the Egyptians and the Somalians are working together now to push the Ethiopians back and weaken their influence in the area. But it's a whole basket case and a huge plate of spaghetti that we're trying to untangle, and we're pretty much still within our first bite. We're going to dive more into that, and we're going to get a little bit of food on our faces and have a bit of a food fight here. Ready, Gavin?
Batter up.
All
Anyway,
right.
so uh, once again, just a real brief recap of the situation. Somalia is not the most centralized country in the world at the moment. They all have only really had a functioning national government since 2012, and I use the word functional advisedly. It was installed more or less by the international community. It's still very much a creature of the international community. It's very much, I would say, a product of American interventionism in the region. And it was definitely put together. The federal government of Somalia was put together by the U.S. to a greater or lesser extent. It has a serious issue in that extending its power beyond Mogadishu and sometimes even within Mogadishu has been an exercise in frustration after frustration and a lot of violence. So you have to remember that when we talk about the Somali government, they actually don't have a lot of control over the territory known as Somalia. Even in territory that is not controlled by Al Shabaab, which is the leading terrorist group in the region, or by the federal government of Somaliland, which is the leading separatist country in the region, really, the Republic of Somaliland is more or less a totally functioning state. Even outside of those two areas, there's not a lot of actual command and control in place. As I may have alluded to last time, the Somali government didn't really have a national army until about 2022. So this is still a very nascent state, and it's contending with the simple fact, that in actually establishing its authority, it has some major problems. And Ethiopia right now is kind of the focal point of all of that frustration and all of that inability to act in one place. Because what they're trying to do, again, is they're signing a treaty with the Somaliland government to get a port on the Red Sea. They haven't negotiated with the Somali government. They're not planning on negotiating with the Somali government. And they're basically just going to take the territory. Where it gets complicated, the Ethiopians already have 8,000 troops in the territory of Somalia, not Somaliland, Somalia. They have 8,000 troops, And they were actually brought there with US backing to support the federal government. Back when it was the TFG, the Transitional Federal Government, in 2011, 2012, the Ethiopians moved in to secure regional towns and transportation hubs against al-Shabaab. And they've been there ever since.
Well, I was going to jump in real quick too and just say that you've had the African Union as well, which is based in Addis Ababa, based in Ethiopia, that's been stabilizing Somalia. And you've had countries, militaries, and police forces over there keeping the situation under control and keeping Somalia from falling apart. So it's been kind of a Pan-African group that's been working. You've had the Nigerians, I think you've had Burundi, you've had Kenya, you've had Ethiopians,
Uganda,
Somalis, Uganda as well. And basically these guys are getting ready to leave at the end of December. So their exit date is the 31st of December of this year. And what happens after that? So when the AU transition mission actually finishes, what's going to happen to Somalia? And what's going to happen to this whole entire part of the region? Is it going to be able to stand up by itself for a little while, or is it just going to completely fall apart? And when it does fall apart, I think it's going to fall apart. What's actually going to happen from that? That's pretty scary.
It's very scary. You have the Egyptian government moving the troops in. I guess that's the Somali plan at the moment. You also have to remember there's another country that we haven't mentioned because it's not an African country. Turkey has a fairly large military presence in Somalia as well, mostly in Mogadishu. They have a large presence there. America, we're present in Somalia. We have drone bases. We have people with guns on the ground. It's not an official deployment, but we have people there. We have Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, which is a hop, skip, and a jump away. We're very much on the ground in Somalia. So there's all of this going on. There's the situation in Somalia, which feeds into the situation in Ethiopia, which of course feeds into the situation in Eritrea. It's a very fraught region, and it normally is, but even more than normal. I know this is kind of not a word to throw around lightly, but this isn't the easiest term in the world, but it's a term that helps one understand the Horn of Africa in an easier way. And the word I'm going to use is omnibalancing. And omnibalancing is this concept in international relations that in really unstable states, you use your external allies against your internal enemies, and you use your internal allies in someone else's country, so rebel groups in someone else's country, to basically pressure against that state. And this term explains so much of what's going on in the Horn of Africa right now, where Ethiopia is trying to get what it wants from Somalia by using an internal ally in the form of Somaliland. Somalia is trying to pressure Ethiopia by bringing up the fact, well, which is a fact, that a good chunk of Ethiopia, which again is on some level a federal state, is actually ethnically Somali. There's a region in Ethiopia called the Ogaden region, and the vast majority of people who live there are ethnically Somali. And in fact, Ethiopia and Somalia have already fought a war over this region in the 70s. So
I was going to jump in and say two things real quick.
Go.
So if you look at the border between Ethiopia and Somalia, it's not really clearly defined.
No.
There is a border between the countries, but it's not very clear where this is your side and this is our side. It's very intermixed. So you have Somalis supporting Ethiopians, and this kind of goes back to what Gavin was saying about omnibalancing, where these countries are supporting groups that are going to destabilize their enemy domestically. or their adversary domestically. So it works itself out where I support your enemy, you support, my enemy, and we just are basically at loggerheads with each other, and nothing actually gets solved, nothing gets taken care of because everything's just out of whack, but it's still kind of in balance.
But the thing is when that order, when that omnibalancing order gets disrupted, the effects can be absolutely devastating. And we've seen that once already in the war in Tigray in northern Ethiopia, where essentially the omnibalancing got out of whack. The Tigrayans were trying to balance against the Ethiopian state by using Eritrea, and it backfired. And the two central states actually teamed up against the smaller group to the detriment of the civilian population. Again, millions of casualties. So when this goes bad, it can go really bad. And of course, that's one of the major concerns between Ethiopia and Somalia right now. And you made an absolutely excellent point about the border. The other thing about that border is it's mostly desert. And not a lot of people live there. The majority of people that do are nomadic. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no population there, because this is a part of the world where you have people living in the desert, you have people living in semi-arid regions. It's not a massive problem, except when there's a famine or a drought. And those conditions,
Which is pretty common in this part of the world.
unfortunately, those conditions do exist at the moment. And this is going to exacerbate the situation, because when that happens, when you have that kind of climactic insecurity, it feeds into violent behavior by non-state actors who are desperately trying to seize supplies, to be fair, to keep their people alive. So that cycle of violence is only going to get worse, and that could draw in state actors.
Well, and to just, I guess, on the same famine note, going back to what Gavin said in the first episode, most of these people are living on subsistence farming, and most of their livelihood is in their animals. So if their animals die, they lose all of their wealth. They lose everything that they've had, and they're essentially destitute. They have no food, they have no animals, they have virtually nothing. So they're going to have to start selling off family heirlooms, and they're going to have to start selling off things that people normally would not want to sell. And when that happens, you have a real crisis on your hands.
And
These people are basically desperate, and they're ready to say, I'll do whatever it takes to survive.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
And I think we're already there to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, this is just an anecdote, but when my family was living in Ethiopia, when you were given advice on driving along Ethiopian roads, particularly outside of the city, that, I mean, this is just advice that was given to people. It's very bleak, but it is true. You are often told, if you hit a person, you slow down, you can negotiate. If you hit a goat, or God forbid, a cow, you don't slow down, you keep going, because that would be of more value to the people in the village than if you'd hit a person, because these animals are literally keeping families alive. And when you start losing livestock, when you do have to sell whatever you can get your hands on, yes, people are in dire straits, and the unthinkable becomes more likely. And when you have large populations who are living in these conditions, and you can see this across the Sahel, you can see this in the Horn of Africa, violence is just much more likely. And that's a serious concern going into this, because you have these massive geopolitical things going on, and you also have a lot of very desperate very hungry, very scared people. It's not a good combination. On top of that, to move back to the geopolitical front for a second, the Somali government is talking about possibly opening negotiations with groups in the south of Ethiopia, like the Oromo Liberation Front. This is, as far as the Ethiopian government is concerned, this is not something they want to even countenance, because they have major issues with separatist groups in basically every corner of the country. But the Oromos are especially an issue, and they're especially embarrassing for the government because, of course, the leader of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, is Oromo. And yet, currently, they are the largest and most, I would say, powerful separatist group. It used to be after the Tigray, but the Tigray situation, again, they're pretty crushed at the moment. The Oromo are not, and that's an ongoing, I would say, low-level insurgency. But low level is sort of a matter of degrees. It's pretty full on. They're assassinating government officials. There definitely been attacks against civilians from both sides. It's not pretty, and it's the most populous part of the country, Oromia. So this is the fact that the Somalis are publicly talking about this is extremely disturbing. And they're genuine questions about what's going to happen. Now, you were talking about the Ethiopian forces mobilizing in Somali regional airports. You want to talk more about that?
Yeah, a little bit. So it looks like that the Ethiopians have been moving into Somalia, and they've been capturing some of the smaller airports to basically stop the Somalis, and my guess now is probably stop the Egyptians from actually being able to utilize them. I mean, that's kind of common sense stuff, but if the Ethiopians are able to take control of the Somali airports, then it's going to be harder for the Somalis to be able to launch an attack on Ethiopia. And it's going to be harder for them to get supplies. And this region is very, very mountainous and desert, and it's very inhospitable for people and trucks, and there's not a lot of infrastructure. So it's going to be very, very advantageous to capture these airports.
And I mean, also, the irony is, of course, that in doing this, they're completely trampling on any idea of Somali sovereignty at all, which, of course, is the sort of the issue that started all of this. The Somalis were upset about the port. They're really going to be upset about this. I mean, I think you're right that in any kind of conflict, this is a major, major advantage. But it's also jumping the gun a bit, I feel, because it's just going to absolutely give the people in Mogadishu the idea that they're doing the right thing. If the Ethiopians are reacting like this now, can you imagine what they're going to do in a couple of months once they actually get a port in Somaliland? There's serious concerns about this, and I think the main thing this is going to do is probably speed up Egyptian deployment of troops to Somalia.
Well, I was going to say that ties back into a little bit with the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that was built in the last 10 years. And I mean, this has really made the Egyptians and the Sudanese very uncomfortable. With the Ethiopians now having a lot of control over the Nile and the flow of the Nile. But and this is just another reason for Egypt and Somalia to come together, where they go, okay, we both are furious at the Ethiopians for what they're doing. They're overstepping their boundaries here. We're going to basically come at them, and we're going to do everything we can to get them to either stop, and they're not going to take down the GERD, obviously, but get them to speed up the flow of the Nile, or get them to push back on having a port on the Red Sea.
I don't know. I mean, people in
And
Egypt,
I don't think either one of those is going to happen. Ethiopia has already been pushing forward, and they're going to keep pushing forward on both of these because for them, it's a matter of existence.
yeah, but I mean, it's also worth talking about that. And, I don't say this lightly. People in Egypt and Sudan, Sudan, I think, is really removed from this conversation right now just because
Hmm.
of the war.
Yeah.
But people in Egypt have been speculating very loudly about what missile or airstrikes would do against this dam, basically, since the Ethiopians had the idea. I mean, again, I was there in 2011, working over the summer, and, you know, on Al Jazeera, English, not Arabic, there were major speculations because I believe people in the Egyptian military were talking about it at the time. There was at least the threat that if you actually complete this, we more or less have the right to take it out.
Hmm.
If we think you're abusing, which of course is just this completely intolerable thought for the Ethiopians. I think part of the issue too is the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, at least geopolitically, have a similar way of approaching things, which is in a pretty imperial kind of way. These are both countries with very long and very proud histories of dominating their neighbors. And they have a really hard time with being told what to do. Um, and
Yeah, well, nobody wants to be second chair. I mean, is the key. They both want to be conducting what's actually going on in the region.
and the issue here is, I tried to explain the idea of compromise to my kids the other day. I said, it's a good compromise because no one's happy. The problem here is if you have a good compromise about the GERD, no one's happy. No one's happy because it would involve the Egyptians and the Sudanese having a significant say in what the Ethiopians do with that dam.
Well, the Ethiopians also want to use the GERD to generate electricity, and they want to sell that electricity to Egypt and to Sudan. They want to sell it down the river. And also, they've promised the Ethiopians as well, their own citizenry, that they're going to be using the GERD to electrify Ethiopia. So they start actually not utilizing it, then somebody's going to be unhappy. It's either going to be their domestic populace, or they do, it's going to be the people down the river.
And the thing again is there's no perfect solution to this. They're not going to be able to please everyone. And again, you talk about electrifying Ethiopia. I think one of the very real issues that they're going to face with that project is, yeah, you might be generating the electricity, but where's it going to go?
Mm-hmm.
Most of Ethiopia does not have the infrastructure where that would make any kind of difference. It's just not wired enough. It's much better than it was 10 years ago. It's still not anywhere near a state where that would make an immediate significant difference. It would make a difference mostly to Addis and the urban area around Addis. And
Yep. Well,
outside of,
yep, I see that as okay. We're gonna send that back to Addis, and we're gonna start building factories, and we're gonna
yeah,
start up light manufacturing, and then we're gonna export, and we're gonna build the economy around Addis, and we're gradually gonna fill it out.
it's going
But
to
it's
take
still going to
too
be
long.
concentrated, and it's gonna take forever.
It's going to take too long. By the time you get halfway there, the government will have been overthrown 3 times. If the country still holds together, which, as we talked about, it's a serious question. Is Ethiopia going to hold? I mean, it's as really as important a question as any in the region. Is that unitary state going to hold together? Uh, you know, it remains to be seen. And you can say that about a lot of places, but certainly, people don't feel great. You look at Somalia, that was a unitary state for a very long time. actually before the 90s, it was sort of like decentralized state in the region, fell apart very messily, still hasn't come back together. You look at Sudan, South Sudan gets independence in 2011. Right now, there are two pretty territorially distinct centers of power in Sudan, and neither of them are really in Khartoum. So you look at those sort of centrifugal forces, and then you look at Ethiopia, which is ethnically the most diverse country in the region, religiously diverse, major cleavages between rural and urban populations,
You
massive.
got to say a huge population as well. It's
It,
not 10 million, it's over 100 million.
and it's growing and it's growing and it's growing. And oh my God, if you want to make a volatile situation worse, send young men, because boy, everything just gets worse when you have a large population of young men, and this country absolutely has that. So it is a perfect storm in so many ways, and I think people are back channeling, people are trying to quiet things down. But one of the dangers of omnibalancing is you get into a mindset where everything becomes a zero-sum game. And a lot of the actors in the region, a lot of the big political actors in the region, I'm not just talking about Ethiopia, I'm talking about Eritrea, I'm talking about Djibouti, I'm talking about the federal government in Mogadishu. All of these people go, well, if this falls apart, I can only benefit. And that is a very dangerous way of approaching things. When you go, my neighbor's catastrophe can only be beneficial to me, you start committing yourself to a political course that will not end well for anyone. And I worry that that's where we're at right now.
And you say not anyone, it's not just the region, it's potentially the whole entire world.
Oh,
Just
I
because
think
all of these countries are around the Red Sea. It's one of the most important routes for trade. And if something were to happen where the Red Sea were to either get blocked or there were to be some sort of a conflict between these countries going on in this region, and it's not just, small groups of terrorists attacking ships, you have armies attacking each other. This could easily get out of hand.
easily get out
And
of
it would slow down trade, prices would go up for everything. It
forever.
would be catastrophic, and it would be something that we are not considering and we should consider when we actually look at the world in the next 3 to 5 years.
And I mean, Lord knows that no one in any position of power is going to be listening to this. But, if I was in any international conflict de escalation program right now, I would be flying into Addis, I'd be flying into Mogadishu, I'd be going, guys, we need to sit down, weekend in Dubai, weekend in Nairobi. We need to talk this thing out because this is not going well. To be fair, I know, again, the Chinese are involved, the UAE's involved, Turkey's involved. These are countries that are very, very aware that if things get out of hand, you can't put the genie back in the box.
Well, they've also got a lot of money invested. I mean, the Chinese have invested heavily in Ethiopia. They're
And the
building a new airport.
Emiratis and the Turks.
The Emiratis as well. So these guys that have dumped a bunch of money into these countries, especially into Ethiopia, are looking at this and going, "Hey, we've got to protect our investment here."
We've got to
If
protect our investment, and I mean, this is not like in the case of the Emirates. This is not a small investment. A lot of the Gulf states have heavily invested in agricultural land in Ethiopia, and they get a lot of their produce from this part of the world. Just a reminder, the Gulf, not the best place in the world to grow produce. They're relying on other countries for agricultural produce, which is important.
I'm wondering why I've never seen Emirati lettuce at the supermarket, but
I'm sure they grow it. They got to grow it. They have greenhouses. I'm sure they're growing it somewhere. but I'm also sure it's very expensive, and they're probably not selling a lot of it in the supermarkets.
Is it organic though? I mean, that's the key.
Dave, you know what? I really don't want to think that about that right before I go to bed. So yeah, so these countries are heavily involved, and again with the cautionary tale of Sudan looming over everyone's head, they're very aware that yeah, you might go into the thing going, oh, I'm just backing this horse, I'm just backing the guy who's going to win, and then it's 3 years later, no one's winning, and like a couple million people have been killed, a couple tens of millions of people have been displaced. There's no end to the conflict in sight, and the only people making money are the arms manufacturers and the gold smugglers. To be fair, those people are making money. Um, there is genuine trepidation though from Saudi, from the UAE, I believe Qatar probably, Turkey definitely. There are a lot of Middle Eastern countries that are involved in this. There are a lot of Western countries that are involved in this. Again, as you pointed out, the African Union, I mean, that's the headquarters are in Addis. This is going to be a major issue for the AU if a conflict breaks out with Somalia. And I think it's one that, unfortunately, I think they're completely powerless to do anything about. They're a pretty toothless organization at this point. And if something were to happen that made them adopt a position against the government in Addis, they would be up a particular creek without a particular instrument. And on that note, I think we can just about wrap things up. Probably as the situation evolves or devolves, I'm sure we'll revisit this. Anything
We'll very likely
yeah.
do a couple of short episodes on this as well.
Oh yeah.
Longer stuff, unless something goes crazy or gets out of hand, or we're probably going to move on to another country next. So thank you guys very much for joining us on the Fringe. It's been Dave.
Woo. Woo, Dave. This is Gavin.
Woo.